Hello, friends. I have something that's been on my mind for a couple days now. It's kind of been bugging me based on a conversation that happened a while ago, but it's just something that I need to get off my chest. For those of you who don't know, I was raised in a Pentecostal Christian family. It was the most extreme set of beliefs that you can probably imagine. I often refer to it as a cult because it is one. A lot of people think that this is no big deal and things like this don't happen in America, but I was banned from watching many things like Harry Potter, certain type of Disney things, anything that represented the mystical arts or seemed too wizardly. Um, but this came with confusing contradictions too when I was brought up. My parents were really into Lord of the Rings. It's kind of a story about a bunch of people that get their asses saved by a wizard over and over again. But somehow, Harry Potter is witchcraft. Don't help. Don't even get me started on that misconception. But a lot of people don't know who know me now. They don't know how far into it I was. When I was 14 and 15 years old, I was preaching in my youth group. I spoke in tongues. I played in the worship band, and when I decided that I wasn't good enough to play in the worship band in my youth group, I switched to operating our soundboard. I went to every outreach. I went to church 3 times a week. I went out into neighborhoods and did, charity work. Just like random acts of kindness type of stuff, homeless shelters. Yeah, me and a guy I was really good friends with. Was a big mentor for me. Him and I used to go together and actually play worship songs for a homeless shelter that was owned by somebody in our church. And most of this took place in Massachusetts before I moved to Iowa when I was 15. I was a young person very much on the path to, I wanted to be a pastor one day. I wanted to be a preacher. I've always been good at public speaking, and that was something I felt like I was called to do. My parents refer to me as a little evangelist. I would constantly find new people to bring to my youth group and take them to church and expose them to our craziness. But I loved it. I believed I was doing God's work. I was an on-fire, passionate lover of God. Fast forward a long time now. For a couple of years, I've been outspoken and open about my atheism. And it comes with a mixed bag of reviews. My parents really never knew how to deal with it or what to do with it. And for a lot of people, they just can't wrap their head around it. Like, how does a guy go from that to a flat-out atheist? And the one thing that gets thrown around a lot when I do talk about it is people use the word choice. I chose to leave the faith. I chose to stop believing in God. I chose. And that's really what this video is about, because I find it very, very frustrating and at a point where I can't get people to quite understand that it's not a choice. But when you are religious, certainly when I was in that world, choice is everything. I mean, the whole notion of free will is a gift from God. God gave this to us. He gave us these opportunities to make mistakes and make bad choices. And the dichotomy between that and making good choices is a lot of what determines what kind of life you're going to have here on earth before you get to your kingdom of heaven. Those were teachings that were in my blood. And so I understand why this comes off as confusing. And so what I want to do and help people understand of why it was not a choice for me to leave my faith is I wanted to talk about what the process was like, how this happened, kind of a short tell-all. It's not going to be like forever long, maybe 10 minutes or so, but there are some people I think that would just benefit from hearing this or understanding how it worked. Most importantly, I want you to think about when you chose to stop believing in Santa Claus. And I'm gonna start with that and think if you can identify when you made that choice, or more importantly, think about when you chose to maybe stop thinking a certain behavior or food was good or bad for you. My guess is, in either of those cases, maybe it's a behavior you used to do that you no longer do, or maybe vice versa, a behavior you do now that you used to not because you thought it was bad or you thought it was not good for you, or the Santa Claus thing. Either direction that you go, I would be impressed if you can point to a conscious choice where you just, oh, this was it, and I decided, yep, now I believe this, or I'm thinking this, and this is what I think. I don't think it happens like that for everybody. And so here's what happened for me. I call this my Jenga tower of beliefs. And if you had your whole Jenga tower of pieces, okay, and they're in there layer by layer going in different directions, we've all played the game Jenga. Each one of those little bricks would represent a little belief, something nominal, something small. Do good unto others. All right, it's a nice belief to have, put that in there. Faith is a virtue. Nice little brick in there. Jesus is the Son of God. That's a brick. How about the flood is real and it happened? That's a brick. The whole tower, I would call my worldview, or Christianity, or belief in God. And I really think for me, all three of those things were interchangeable, because if you have one, you certainly have the other, and they're all very important in terms of how you structure all of your other beliefs. If you believe in God, you're, probably a Christian. And obviously, you can believe in a different God or the same God, depending on how you look at it, have a different faith. But I think the structure of this works the same. Every other belief in that Jenga tower has to coincide with that. If it contradicts that, it's the most important belief, right? You can't hold a belief that contradicts the overall tower, because if you do, it's not going to fit. It's going to mess you up, and it doesn't work. And so for me, because I was raised Pentecostal, we believed all kinds of crazy things, like the earth was only 10,000 years old. Evolution wasn't real. It was just a scientist's made-up thing to try and disprove the existence of God. We had all these beliefs, and the reason those was because we believed that God's word was true and was a historically accurate book. And so that for the timeline to make sense, evolution can't be true. And so a lot of my other beliefs were dependent on that. And what happened over the course of probably 10 years, and it really started in middle school for me, probably when I was about 11, 12, started thinking for myself. It was one by one, I found little things that contradicted my Jenga tower. So they were in there, and they were beliefs I would develop, and it was kind of like taking a little block out each time. And each time I took a little block out, the tower became more and more hollow, and my behavior probably reflected that, to the point where by the time I was 16, I was not the same person that I was even at 15. I mean, it was changing so rapidly, and the type of things and the type of behaviors and what was important to me was changing so rapidly. When I moved to Iowa, I did maintain my Christianity, but we went to a church that was much more nominal, much less of the laying on the hands and the speaking in tongues and the crazy worship services with people falling over from the power of God and stuff like that. It was very bland. And I met a girl there. It was my first girlfriend. And, I'm going to guess my views even then probably seemed extreme to her. Because I still had many of them, but many of them were getting walked back every day. Going to public high school, being confronted with nice gay people, changed my worldview overnight. Something called cognitive dissonance happens when you hold two beliefs that are in contradiction with each other, and it's actually painful, and it forces us to change one of them, right? It's a natural process, and it's one a lot of people struggle with if you've never heard the term. But one example is homosexuals intentionally choose to leave in sin and are evil. That was in my brick. Okay. And then every homosexual I've ever met is really nice. These don't work together. And I ultimately chose to throw out the living in sin, hate God one, and throw out the one where they're evil, and hang on to the one that was obviously true, because it was every interaction that I had. And some of them even claimed, and I didn't believe them at the time, but they claimed to believe in God. They claimed to be Christians. And that didn't make sense to me. I didn't think that was possible. Because, quite frankly, I was young and immature, and I didn't understand how these things worked. And so time went on, and more of these bricks start coming out. To the point where by the time I'm 18, I've made all kinds of excuses for my lifestyle. I decided to lose my virginity for the first time at 18 years old, which is something I had sworn I was going to save for marriage because of my faith. I just rolled back so many of these things. I decided to drink, have a good time, all kinds of stuff. But for the most part, the behavior principles and the life principles kept telling me how to live my life. And there was a lot that was influenced from that. And then I got to the point where there was so much contradictions, and my Jenga tower had become so hollowed out that I just stopped trying and didn't want to think about it anymore. And part of what contributed to this is I had my relationship with Megan, had my first kid, and then my second kid, and I couldn't even worry about that. I was just working so many hours, just trying to keep money on the table. Survival was all that mattered. But it had been a pretty rocky relationship with my parents for the last few years, because I had done a lot of things I didn't agree with. I had told them that I was leaving the church and that I was going to take my relationship with God personally, but didn't think it was any of their business or any clergy's business or any church member for that matter. So I was doing all this on my own. And then at some point, probably in the last year of my first marriage, the biggest block to come out of that Jenga tower comes out. And that's one that faith is a virtue. Why did I stop believing faith is a virtue? Quite frankly, I got asked a question that was such a good question, it made me finally deal with this. I had started accepting certain things were true about science over the time. That was some of the ones with a big deal with science. It was clear to me that the science around how we measure the history of the earth and all of that was good. So I started accepting a view where God probably still created the universe, but he probably set in motion evolution, probably set in motion the Big Bang. But I started to accept that scientific theory because the overwhelming evidence was just so good. And there were so many other things that didn't make sense. For example, why would I deny those parts of science, but accept the science that successfully caused my plane to take off and fly and then successfully land, right? Apparently I'm good with science while I'm on the plane. The second I get off of it, I'm like, hey, thanks for the flight, science. Now go fuck off. That makes no sense. Makes no sense. And so I started accepting all these other science because I realized that science is done the same way, whether it's evolution, whether it's, geology, whether it's, for the most part, the tenets are the same. If you're the scientist that proves other scientists wrong, if you're the guy who figures out that 150 years of research on Darwin's theory, and you're the one who finds the giant hole in it that proves that it's all wrong, you're like king of the science world, which is the opposite of how my faith works. My faith works in the way where we already know what our worldview is and what the conclusion is, and everything else has to fit in our tower. And if not, it's got to be thrown out. And so how do you wrestle with all of this? It's tough. And the reason I realized faith wasn't a virtue was because of what I believed about the nature of God. I believe we have a good God, right? I believed that if God is omnibenevolent, and that's his most important feature, is he created us to love us and actually care about us and live on this planet. He cares about what's going to happen to our eternal soul. He cares about how we live our lives here, and he wants us to be happy and live right and do the things that are going to benefit us the most. If all that was true, well, then it's not possible that he put me in a situation where I was too intelligent and too curious to where I would find these things and think about these things in a way that would contradict each other and cause me pain. Surely, if faith alone was a virtue and I was supposed to believe him blindly, that can't be the case because he made me this curious person. It wasn't good enough for me. I couldn't just have faith. There are many people who try to tell me that throughout my life, and just having faith wasn't satisfying. I was a curious guy. I was a science, nerd. I wanted to read more, and I'm still that guy. I mean, those of you that know me, I listen to podcasts after podcasts in the car. I listen to podcasts with neuroscientists talking about psychology and current events and different things. I just love learning, and I love the ability to gain knowledge. And when I decided that faith couldn't be a virtue, I also looked at and examined, is there any other scenario in my life where faith is a virtue? Do you just have faith that your plane is going to land? Do you just have faith that, if you get in a car accident, it'll probably work out? No, my guess is you put your seatbelt on, and you probably would be upset if the airline hired Joe the plumber to fly you from point A to point B without training him or without testing him, right? You don't just have faith in those cases. You want answers. You want evidence. You want to know that the systems around you have your best interests in mind. And so I realized I didn't have faith about anything else in my life. Hell, most of you don't even have faith. And I'm saying most of you because a lot of people don't realize this. You don't even have faith that somebody is telling you the truth from moment one. If somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, my name's John," you're like, "Yeah, sure. All right, cool, John." Because it doesn't really matter that much. It doesn't matter that much, right? Now, if you're meeting that person and you had some email correspondence with somebody else and says, you're about to go sign a multi-million-dollar contract with this person, their name is John, and they're meeting you here, and you had pretty good reason to believe that this was all legit, right? Like you've been working for months to get this contract, and you show up and this person goes, "Hey, my name's John," and shakes your hands, but nobody else vouches for them? He doesn't show you any kind of ID? Are you trusting that situation? Oh, all of a sudden I don't even know if his name's John. Maybe he's lying. Maybe I don't trust him. We want evidence. We want evidence about every little thing that we believe. And the only one where I was expected to not have evidence was God. Why would he set that up that way? That wouldn't make any sense. And so I gave that up, and I genuinely said, if God truly is omnibenevolent and loves everyone and loves me and created me the way I am to be the way I am, then he would want me to get some evidence. He would want me to search within the materials available and figure out whether or not I was on good, solid ground to believe the way I believed, that God existed. And so for the first time in my life, when I was probably about 25 or 24, I started reading books by prominent atheists. The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens. And then the one that really, really, really made me realize I had no belief in God at all anymore was called The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris. I had been told as a kid that these three people, they're part of a group of four that were known as the Four Horsemen of the Non-Apocalypse. I was told that they were evil. I was told that they're just angry atheists that just want to destroy God. And it didn't take but like 3 chapters to realize they had the genuine interest of humanity in mind when they wrote these books. You know, it blew my mind how much of a morally conscious person Richard Dawkins was, because as a child, I was propagandized to believe that he was a very evil man. I was propagandized to believe that he hated Christians. He was a person full of anger in his heart, just wanted to destroy Christianity. I started reading his material and finding out that I had been lied to a lot about that. And it was not the nature of the texts at all. Now, Christopher Hitchens, in his book, even comes off really offensive. God is not great. How religion poisons everything. Like, damn, dude, like, chill out, right? But turns out you read that one and find out it's really not about hating God at all. He just didn't want it pushed on him, and it was, because it gets pushed on everyone. It gets thrown in your face everywhere you drive. These billboards up are always owned by Christian organizations and Christian companies, telling you what to think, what to feel, how to believe, how to behave, and that God loves you. It gets thrown in your face everywhere in the U.S. You can't escape it, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to be of a person of a different faith, let alone an atheist. I feel like that would be even worse in the United States. But in a lot of ways, being an atheist is still taboo sometimes. It gets you chastised. Making this video, I'm sure I'm going to get criticism for it. The thing that is important to understand is to come back to Santa Claus and believing that, a food that you used to eat is bad for you now, or maybe a behavior that you used to not do is totally fine and totally morally acceptable to do. For me, a big one of those was I used to feel a lot of guilt for having sex outside of marriage. That was like super evil, and I changed my opinion about that, probably when I was 22. I realized I was carrying around this guilt and I didn't need to, because I hadn't done anything wrong morally. When those beliefs change for you, they're based on other beliefs that change. And that's what happened for me. It was a one-by-one chain of events, like pulling those blocks out. Because while I was taking those blocks out of this Jenga tower, I was building up a new one slowly over here with them. And so as this tower became more and more hollow and eventually collapsed when I was about 24, 25, this tower over here was growing, and it was a part of a new worldview. And all of those beliefs fit together and made a lot more sense and made a much more solid foundation. And one is truly dependent on the other. One thing that never changed for me was my belief in living a good life, being a moral person, being a compassionate person. The Moral Landscape by Sam Harris helped me realize that I didn't need an all-powerful creator of the universe that can send me to hell to keep me from doing exactly that. I could be a good person without threat of punishment. In fact, I was wired to. That's one great thing about the human animal is we cannot survive without each other. And so altruism is wired right into our DNA because it's beneficial for our mutual survival. We're not going to get there without each other. And to have each other, we need acts of kindness. We need love for each other. I didn't choose any of this. No one would. It was so hard for me to come out as atheist. I was facing possibly being disowned by my parents, having people that used to be friends with me not be able to make sense of who I am as a person or what I'm like. I was facing losing a lot of people in my life. I was terrified to not have support from my parents and their grandchildren, because for them it's almost like choosing the other side of a holy war, right? I have decided what I'm telling them is that the very thing that I now believe makes their whole worldview not make sense. It's a threat. It's a threat. I realize many Christians aren't that way, but that was the world that I lived in. That was the world I grew up in. And so who would choose that? Who would choose this giant risky move that can only seem to cause harm? I could have just stayed in the closet, right? I could have just kept my mouth shut, realized I had no faith, didn't tell anybody, kept it to myself. I didn't do that because for me, my number one overall moral importance is honesty and truth. I realized that even though thou shalt not lie is something like, the sixth commandment, and technically it's thou shalt not bear false witness, very different thing, but we won't go there. I lied all the time. And the best person I lied to, or I was at lying to, was myself. I lied to myself constantly. Lied to myself about what I believed or how I felt or what I wanted to do, or all kinds of little things. But I lied to other people far too much. And that is one virtue that I think is more important. And I just couldn't lie to my friends and my family and say that I still believed in God when I knew I didn't. That wasn't something that I felt was appropriate or what needed to do. I can't ever believe again. And it drives me crazy when people say, it's really condescending, oh, you'll come back one day, you're just a lost sheep, you're just going through a prodigal son phase, it's just off in the world and doing your own thing because you're mad at God or whatever. They come up with all kinds of reasons because, again, I'm a threat to their worldview because I'm saying their God doesn't exist, which is kind of a big deal. None of that is fair. I'm never coming back. You can't unsee evidence once you've seen it, right? Like, a lot of people are absolutely convinced. Not a lot of people. They're a fringe minority, but there are some people who are absolutely convinced that 9/11 was a total conspiracy made up by the government. Everything about it. Didn't even happen. They faked the newsreels. All you have to really do for that person is bring them to New York, show them the damage, show them the wreckage, and have them talk to one firefighter that fought that fire. And all of a sudden they believe that 9/11 really happened really fast. That's it, right? It's like once you see the evidence, you can't unsee it. You can't unbelieve that. And this is why people don't change their beliefs. Or do this based on choice. You don't just go, I feel like I believe in aliens this week. Nah, no, I don't. That's not how this works. You either think you have good evidence or you don't. I thought I had great evidence for why God exists. I thought the sheer beauty and mysteriousness of the universe. I thought the fact that there had to be some moral organization to things that had to be set up by a system of rules. Otherwise, my worldview didn't make sense. I thought that the complexity of life and the clear order there is to our planet and the universe was hard evidence for the existence of a creator, whatever you wanted to call it. I thought I had hard evidence with the Bible. I thought that the fact that the Bible had stayed around for so long and survived so many different governments, so many different situations, I thought that was evidence for God's existence. It was only realizing that that was bad evidence by being shown evidence of other things. It was appeals to things outside of that made me realize I had that wrong and I didn't have good reason or good evidence to believe in God anymore. And so I stopped immediately. It wasn't something like, now that I've seen the evidence, let me think about it for a while. It's just like, either God exists or he don't, and here's the conditions that would mean he does, and here's the conditions that would mean he doesn't. It's exactly like Santa Claus. The moment you figure out that there's no way Santa Claus can make it to every household with a thing full of presents because the physics would not allow for that, you stop believing in Santa Claus. It's all the evidence you need. You just need to know that there's no possible way that there's a man called Santa Claus who flies around from house to house putting presents in their chimneys. Just doesn't work. And for me, that's exactly what happened with God. And I'll end on this. This ended up going longer than I wanted. I know it's almost 30 minutes long, but I'm an atheist about the God of the Bible for the same reason that everyone else is an atheist about Zeus, Odin, Thor, Poseidon, the fly spaghetti monster, or any other god. And if you wonder what I mean by this, think really hard about why you don't put all of your faith in Odin. Why not? Books about him have been around for forever. He is a figure that you could look at all the history. What is it? What's different about your God of the Bible than Odin? Why do you really believe that that's any different? And for me, I realized the same reasons I don't believe in Odin, the same standard should apply for all gods, and that includes Yahweh. So if you've listened to this, I appreciate it. And stop telling or ever using the term someone chose to leave the faith, someone chose to stop being a Christian. It's really offensive, and some people really struggle with these things in an emotional way that they have to go to therapy for, aka me. It's just hurtful language. I didn't choose any of this. I just saw something I could no longer unsee. And none of this is asking you to believe the way I do. If you still believe in your God and feel you have great evidence and great reason to believe in Him, I'm glad for you. If He brings joy to your life, I'm glad for you. I don't agree with you, but we can still be friends, and I can still love you, and I can still be a good person and still have compassion for you. And I do. So thank you for listening.